your, elected officials do want to hear from you and they do want to hear what you say. And so I will always encourage people. There is certainly power in numbers. And I think that's kind of the true benefit of organized veterinary medicine.
Politics, the art of the possible.
Until recently, the only thing I wanted to do with politics is watch the actor who plays Mr. Feeney in Boy Meets World play John Adams in the movie 1776. But whether we enjoy the dynamics of government or not, the truth is that there is a place for government and we need individuals in our profession to be a voice in it. Dr. Lauren Stump was an early adopter, as we say, of veterinary medicine. She grew up on a hobby farm in Louisiana, and she didn't go too far to LSU, where it is her alma mater 2 times over.
I went to LSU knowing that I wanted to go to vet school after undergrad. I was an animal science major. Absolutely loved that and learning a lot more about the production agriculture side of just animal husbandry.
Working as a kennel hand before vet school, she thought she really liked surgery and thought that might be what she would focus on, and even own her own practice.
Well, I quickly learned when I got to vet school that I do and still love surgery, but I also loved a lot of other things along the way. And so I really enjoyed all of the clinical rotations that I did. There are very few that I don't think I enjoyed that much. And I loved so much about veterinary medicine, and I was trying to explore, what if I did a different specialty, what would that look like? What if I didn't, really want to be a surgeon? I kind of felt that I might, if I went down the path to specializing, that kind of knowing my personality and knowing how I like change, I might feel that I had potentially made the wrong choice in kind of dedicating so much time to one particular subset in any specialty. And so as I was kind of going through my veterinary career in vet school, I also was really involved in a number of kind of extracurricular activities too, and some of those kind of being policy related.
Lauren discovered she was interested in policy, and so with the advice of a very wise mentor, she was able to get some really unique experiences in veterinary medicine, and that is why I brought her today.
I actually ended up at the good suggestion of a mentor of mine. I was thinking about kind of having that late vet student crisis as to what are you going to do next, realizing probably didn't want to go through match, probably didn't want to do an internship and a residency. After all, I had seen an advertisement essentially for the fellowship program that American Veterinary Medical Association sponsors in Washington, D.C., where recent graduate or not recent graduate can work on Capitol Hill for a year, basically paid by Avma, but not as a lobbyist, and work within an office. And I thought that would be really interesting. And I had a mentor suggest to me, if you don't do it now, you're probably never going to go do it. So I applied for that program, and I was lucky enough to get into it my first year, kind of right out of vet school. And so I graduated knowing then that I was going to move up to Washington, D.C. and do that kind of policy related experience fresh out of school, which was really exciting, and also a little bit terrifying from somebody who'd lived in Louisiana and not lived anywhere else for, the first 26 years of life. You go somewhere completely different. It was a little intimidating. And I moved up to DC and just had a blast. I loved it. I loved, immersing myself in that role and working in that office on everything related to, animal and public health, to energy and natural resources issues and other things that come through, as any type of scientist working in an office like that. You're certainly expected to wear a lot of hats, and no one who works in Capitol Hill, I think of all the different jobs and the people that I've seen, from chief of staff to interns, nobody is above manning the phone lines and answering constituent questions that happen to come in. So that's definitely something everybody on the Hill is willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and do those types of jobs as well. But it was really interesting, I think, for me personally, to kind of take a step back from, being immersed in veterinary education for so many years and really thinking about, myself as a veterinarian and as a clinical practitioner, and kind of really dive into kind of more of the policy aspects that affect, not just veterinarians, but people on a day-to-day level. And it kind of really brought my thinking around towards what are the decisions that are made, and how are they made in Washington, D.C., and in state legislatures and state governments, not just the federal government, and then within your region and your localities that might affect veterinary practice on a daily level. And I got really interested in that. Had been interested in policy, of course, before I came to DC. That was why I ultimately went. But through that, I think I really kind of got the policy bug. And then I ended up working after that 1 year fellowship was finished up. I actually kind of jumped back to clinical practice full time over in Northern Virginia, and was looking for policy related work while I honed my clinical skills a little bit more. And I found a job actually with Avma, not as the fellowship is kind of a 1 year contractual related position. So you know that you've got 1 year, you get a fantastic opportunity to work on the Hill and to learn so many things that you otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to learn. You get exposed to so much, and you see so much, and just see everything that kind of goes into the process that otherwise is a little hard to fathom, I think, if you haven't been exposed to it, or certainly at least was for me. And that's kind of what led me to getting the bug to stay in the policy realm, and stayed in Washington, D.C., actually accepted a job working in government relations for Avma, and stayed there for about 3 years. 3 years ago is when I eventually left that role. So I had a really nice kind of 4 years working in that policy related space in Washington that I absolutely loved.
Yeah, and let's go back to your fellowship because
Mhm.
I'm someone who is completely clueless. So, first of all, like what did you do on a day-to-day basis? You mentioned
Mhm.
phone calls, but like can you describe some of the things that you did?
Yeah, it varied, certainly. As a fellow, it grew kind of as you go through different stages too. So you're put into, say, an office, and I should kind of take a step back too, and say, whether you're in a Senate office or a House office, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, every office is kind of like its own small business. So it's kind of run in its own way. They won't necessarily have the exact same, staff numbers or issue sets and expertise that match up among staff. The numbers of staff actually vary pretty widely between offices. And then depending on whoever that member of Congress is, that representative or that senator, whatever committees they happen to sit on or maybe even chair, then they're going to be heavier on staff, say, that pertain to those issue sets. They're also going to have more staff that are going to be more heavily focused on things that are really specific to, say, that state or, that district, for example. And so every office is really, really different. So, I can speak from experiences that I've seen, but there's going to be a lot of variety outside of this as well. And so one thing, of course, you'll have interns, especially that come in the summer, and those are usually students that are studying at a university. That might be, political science majors, communications majors. Those, the types of things that I was never interested in when I was an undergrad, and then ironically had to learn a lot from the people who had potentially, gone to school for those types of things when I got out and got out of vet school. There's a lot that we can learn from people in other fields. Um, so there will be interns, and those are typically, the individuals who will be kind of answering the first phones as they come in, and maybe passing constituent mail or other things on to other staffers. And you have your legislative aides and your legislative assistants and legislative director, and you'll have certain professional staff that are kind of tied more to various issue areas, and you have a chief of staff, and of course you have the member themselves. So generally, when you get to the level of a legislative assistant, you'll have kind of a specific subset of issues that you would handle within every office. So, every member of Congress really is going to have somebody that kind of handles healthcare policy for their office, that, main staffer who really can dedicate more time to that type of issue. And there's going to be someone who typically handles, more energy policy or things on that. And sometimes that'll be the same person, and sometimes it won't be the same person. It just kind of depends. If you are, say, a chair or ranking member of a committee, then you'll have an entirely separate staff. So I'm kind of speaking from a personal office staff perspective that kind of goes back to either that state or that district and liaises with them. And they'll also have a staff that's specific to the committee that they are chair or ranking member of. And so that'll be very separate from the personal office staff. And those are, because those committees are kind of for the larger Congress as a whole, not just for that member specifically. But members who have within their personal office, if you're a member who sits on a certain committee, then you'll have a particular staff or two members of your staff that would be kind of really in the weeds on what happens in that committee, be really well versed on it, and kind of staff them for that. So help them, do additional research, put together briefs, help in the legislative drafting process, that sort of thing. And so, some of the things that you might do would be researching issue areas and pretty deep into, more than just your, Google search, but researching issue areas and meeting with different stakeholders kind of on both sides of that issue to determine where people are, really close consultation with, say, your state, your district, or others that are going to be affected, close consultation with committee staff, and trying to basically gather the basis for drafting a bill, taking that to legislative council, drafting it up, and then basically kind of working that whole process to get it finessed to where you think it would be, something that member of Congress would approve. Typically, it's something that they'll be directed, that they'll ask for, and you kind of go through this whole process in a collaborative kind of office-wide way too, in collaboration with external parties, and making sure that you're going to have something that hopefully, if introduced, would actually pass at least one chamber and become law. But there's, of course, as we know, I don't know what the actual statistics are, but there are many, many, many more bills introduced than will ever see the light of day on, the House or the Senate floor. Most of those are never going to come close to passing. There are a lot of drafts, I think, that never get introduced as well. Lots of draft bills that never go. So I think that's kind of part of the beauty of the system, is it takes a lot of legwork, and it takes a lot of collaboration to get stuff done, I think, if the process is working correctly.
Some might say beauty, some might say frustration.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It can be very frustrating at times as well.
Are you allowed to say what topic you worked on, or?
It ranged. I mean, topics that I worked on range from a lot of different things. I think, with a background as a veterinarian, I would get pulled into even human healthcare conversations, infectious disease conversations. Again, looking at energy and natural resources issues. I'm also from Louisiana, so we're like, oil and gas, right? And sure, I mean, I can today, or at least I can learn about it. So, I certainly don't mean to make light of it and seem like everyone's just kind of flying by the seat of their pants either. It's certainly, there's a lot of very well educated, individuals who are kind of working on these issues. But there was a lot of variety in the different things that I worked on, but I just absolutely loved every minute of it. It was fast paced, and definitely can be tiring at times too, but worth every minute.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, now that you said you got called in on all sorts of things, I can see
Yeah,
how that is an opportunity to learn a lot.
it is.
And
Yeah.
I give them kudos for calling people who maybe at first it's like, why are you asking me that question? But you never know who might have an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
So
Right.
working with the AVMA,
Mhm.
what what kind of things did you help with working with the AVMA and having those ties?
Yeah. So that was really fun several years for me. I took over in issues that while I was there, kind of really everything related to animal and public health. Worked on several particular large pieces of legislation, things within USDA and FDA that were more from, say, a regulatory standpoint too. And so a lot of that it was keeping up and building more relationships in DC. I was always surprised at how many opportunities are out there for veterinarians. And so I would work with all of the organizations that you would typically think of working on, say, a livestock or animal agriculture issue with AVMA. And so the swine practitioners, bovine practitioners. Those, of course, were groups that we worked with very closely, and poultry veterinarians. But even kind of taking steps beyond that, those veterinary groups, the other stakeholders around that too. And so the associated, livestock and poultry organizations that represent those industries within DC. We would work with those organizations that represent pharmaceutical and biologics development companies in DC. Again, kind of working with each other to kind of build stakeholder consensus, whether that's going to be something that might be a proposal or proposed rule that's come up through FDA or USDA, or potentially was a large legislative package. So I got to work for a pretty long time while I was there and learned from a lot of really smart people while we were working on the 2018 Farm Bill. And typically, animal agriculture and certainly veterinary medicine, we stay very far away from the Farm Bill. I mean, there are some provisions in there related to kind of one subset of USDA that are, really important to veterinary medicine. But outside of that, there's really nothing that happens in that bill that has anything to do with vet med. But after and in the wake of the 2015 high path avian influenza outbreak, there actually kind of was a groundswell within not just turkey and poultry industry, but kind of within animal agriculture and livestock as a whole, looking at how might we be able to, potentially improve or to change the way that we are prepared for an animal disease outbreak, an unforeseen, whether it's foreign or endemic, but another really severe disease outbreak like we've seen. How can we, better leverage on the ground resources and also leverage the National Animal Health Laboratory Network to put, practices in place and actually quite literally practice beforehand what will happen if this were to happen. And so I was lucky enough to be able to work with a large group of people building consensus around that, and actually kind of within the 2018 Farm Bill, creating provisions within that bill that would stand up that program that's at USDA. And so now it's actually in existence. I think it's in the second or third year now of actually the grants to proposals for states, for veterinary schools to be able to participate in these exercises and to build out these programs and exercises. So that was something that personally was a lot of fun and really rewarding for me to kind of start before that even ever existed, go through that process, consulting with, of course, it was a lot of consultation with Senate and House agriculture committees and kind of working through what that would look like, really close work with USDA to make sure that, what we were doing in state departments of agriculture to know that what, would be proposed ultimately would actually be a good tool. That's kind of just a lot of what that conversing is to make sure that you're all on the same page and you understand one another's needs and not trying to make a solution that actually is a square peg in a round hole. So that was really fun, kind of working that through the process and then, seeing that particular program kind of come to fruition on the back end of it and, being able to go to the USDA website and pull it up and say, I actually had a hand in kind of helping make this happen. So I think that's one example of something at AVMA that was really, really rewarding. Other examples would be, working more closely with FDA. I got to assist in drafting Federal Register comments, which seems really nerdy, but I love to write. So those were really fun for me too. And I love to get really in the weeds on issues. And of course, always trying to build good partnerships and spread the message for veterinary medicine. I think the primary role of, in my role in government relations and AVMA was to be a resource and to be an educator. So I think, what a lot of what I do in my role now is communications and education. And it was really similar to my previous role. Slightly different audience, but at the end of the day, it was communicating around the veterinary profession. What are the things that are important to veterinarians and to veterinary medicine? And so as a veterinarian, I was really specific and kind of particular to some of the things that were more, animal and public health related, pharmaceuticals related, biologics or vaccine development related. But I also, had a colleague that was really involved in student education and student loans and small business and those types of things. So we each kind of had our, similar to how we talked about, staff in different offices having different issue sets and responsibilities. We definitely had our, own issue sets that were ours to kind of hang on to and to foster all those relationships and to cultivate that. But most of it is really, I think the cornerstone of it is communicating veterinarians and veterinary medicine and what are the tools that veterinarians need to practice effectively. The good thing is that veterinarians have a pretty high approval rating most of the time. And so it was always a little bit of an easier conversation just to start with, I think. Most people have some fond memories and stories of veterinarians if they've ever owned any type of animal, pet or otherwise. So I had a pretty easy time scheduling meetings to talk to people.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to talk about animals. We would usually spend, 15 minutes chatting about all their, family pets and, sharing photos and all that kind of stuff. So it was fun.
So, all the president's pets, all the senator pets. Oh, no,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, and you may have to tell us stories about that too, but, no, that is really interesting because as I'm listening, I'm hearing a lot of
Mhm.
these skills and things that you're getting to do, everything from being the voice for veterinary medicine,
Mhm.
so being able to advocate, working on
Yeah.
communication skills, constantly learning, writing, educating. But the one I really am picking up that, you really have to stop and think about if you're not in this is the relationship building. That is
Mhm.
probably a huge part of what you were doing was relationship building.
Yeah.
All that time you were talking about Senator's dog Fluffy, right? Is a relationship.
Yeah.
And that I think that is an advantage that veterinarians have is we can always bond on something that is very close to people's hearts, and that is our animals. So that's a really cool perspective.
Yes. That is very true. People are very passionate about their pets, yes, but about animal health, passionate about food production, passionate about so many things. And it really is, I think, a testament to the human animal bond, just how willing people are in general to speak to veterinarians. I always enjoyed that aspect of it. But you're right. Yes, it's a lot of relationship building. And I think it's really not that different from a lot of relationship building that would just happen in any other field or in daily life. If I think about relationships that I've formed with clients in the past, and while I was at AVMA, actually, I worked clinical practice on weekends as well, and so got to do see more of that side of actual clinical veterinary medicine that I still really enjoy, but I think about some of the relationships that I form with clients and with other veterinarians, and now in a role in industry, the relationships that we form, with each other, even, veterinarians working for different companies, veterinarians in industry and at, university, in private practice. And it's really not that dissimilar from those types of relationships that kind of grow and cultivate over time. It's that constant building of trust, and knowing that you can have an open and honest conversation with somebody, and that they can potentially, tell you something that I disagree with this, or I do agree with that. I like that. Let's go this way. Or I completely disagree. We're on two separate pages. Let's start over. It is, I think, a bit more like that than we might think of.
Yeah. So what are some things that you find you have learned now with this perspective that a lot of veterinarians don't understand? Like, what is something you can share
Right.
from your experiences?
Yeah, one thing, kind of related to policy, but casting a wider net here too. One thing that I will always mention, especially when I'm talking to students, when they're potentially interested in, say, what we bucket as those kind of non-traditional career trajectories, whether that's a policy related career, outside of government, but kind of related to it, or whether that is a career working for a government agency, or whether that's a career in industry, or whether it's kind of in that other world of venture capital and other types of interesting roles that are out there. Your career path doesn't have to be so planned out. And it certainly, if I look at my own career path, it doesn't seem linear to me. So, maybe we'll think about like, oh, at the end of it all, you'll look back and it'll look a certain way. And hopefully that doesn't happen for a very long time. But I think that one thing I like to emphasize is that you can definitely start in one place and move down a certain path, and then it's not that you're necessarily going to sideline and do something completely different, but it doesn't have to be the exact set path that perhaps you had envisioned for yourself. And so I think that's one thing that I've learned, just kind of being out and in my personal career at least, is that it's taken different turns that I hadn't necessarily expected it to, and each of those has led to something else as well. And so, every single time I've seen potentially, from going through one doorway, expecting you're going to be in a room, you're instead, confronted with, say, a wide open field. And there'll be other doorways at the end of it. It's a really bad metaphor, I know, because there aren't doorways at the end of a field, but at the end of the road, no matter how many twists and turns it takes, there's going to be other opportunities that you probably weren't aware of that are now available because of the turns that were taken to get there. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a set path, or a formula that's followed, to get from point A to point B to C to D. I think, veterinarians, we do tend to have, at least most of the vets I know, a little bit of a type A planner personality. And I try to tell myself on a regular basis not to plan so much and see where life takes me a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there something that you wish veterinarians knew more about when it came to policy or the
Hmm.
more of a government aspect of
Yeah.
veterinary medicine?
Yeah. I think a lot of veterinarians know this, and I think it's probably more that veterinarians don't really have a lot of time to spend outside of what they're already working on in the hospital, and everything that's going on. But your, elected officials do want to hear from you, and they do want to hear what you say. And so I will always encourage people. There is certainly power in numbers, and I think that's kind of the true benefit of organized veterinary medicine, of your state and your local VMAs, and a national organization like the AVMA, is being able to kind of build that consensus. So there's cohesive messaging in whenever it's a federal issue or a state issue, There's kind of cohesive messaging from the profession that will be beneficial in kind of amplifying the voice of many. And so a lot of these, organizations are what a state or a federal agency is going to look to when they're potentially updating or changing a regulation or drafting a new regulation. Those entities are going to be some of the first sources that they'll look to when they need expertise on those, because they just simply can't go out and field every single veterinarian across the United States necessarily on that issue. And so being involved in organized veterinary medicine makes your voice heard to not just those elected officials and the unelected officials who work in the government system, but it also makes your voice heard to the association that'll be passing on a message, regardless of whether you're involved in it or not. So I always encourage people to become active, to become involved in associations, and they do want to hear from you. The associations want to hear from you. They want you to become an active and involved member. So don't be afraid to speak up. And I think having the benefit of having numbers behind you certainly helps.
So what is one of the best ways to get involved and participate? Is it joining
Mhm.
a state board, or what are some of the
Yeah.
things that you've seen people do?
I think certainly starting with joining a state veterinary medical association is a great place to start. That will also open up opportunities to be involved in different committees within that organization, possibly lead to other opportunities if there is, say, a government relations type committee or a task force that volunteers for helping, draft testimony if the association is called up to, give testimony on a bill or something that's moving forward. Those are really good ways to kind of at least let people know that you're out there, and to kind of get your name and your face out there on both a local and a state level, and potentially on a national level as well. That's something that veterinarians are interested in. But I certainly think VMAs are a great place to start. There are other organizations out there that aren't veterinary medical associations that are, particular to various different, issue sets. Those could be other places to look as well for involvement and for organization. But by and large, I think one of the more traditional routes certainly is joining a VMA. And if there are veterinarians who are really interested in maybe not even specifically veterinary medical policy, but they want to advocate for other things as well. There are certainly city council and board positions and other things available in your locality if you have the bandwidth to tackle that sort of thing. We've had veterinarians previously who've been members of Congress and senators, and I think it's always fun to see veterinarians in those areas of leadership. I think the educational kind of skill set that we're given from, not just an individual health basis and the health of the patient, but we look at herd health and infectious disease control and other things that we learn through veterinary medicine. You combine that with the clinical skills that you basically operate kind of more like a pediatrician, and you learn how to read between the lines a lot when you're working day to day with clients. But the skill set that we have as veterinarians, the ability to connect with people and talk with people, to be able to distill a lot of information and to really come up kind of with a solution to a problem, kind of a methodical soap process, if you
Mm.
will, to solving problems, really does lend itself very well to being involved in public policy. And so I always think it's fun, when I see veterinarians either running for Congress or running for local seat or a state government seat or anything like that. I think we need more.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. You
Yeah,
can have impact in a lot of different ways. You are still a
absolutely.
veterinarian, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be veterinary related.
Exactly. Or it
Mhm.
is in a way, right? It is
Yeah,
veterinary related, but um it's just having an impact from a different angle. You're still using all of those skills that you have learned through training to be in veterinary medicine. So I think that's
absolutely.
exciting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Do you have like a fun story of like a senator that had a weird pet story or anything fun?
I did hear this story secondhand. This one I think would have happened on a Friday. I think it was a member of staff had their dog in the office, and the dog started exhibiting signs as if it were having a seizure, potentially. It was a very small dog. I want to say it was a Yorkie or a similar breed, but less than 10 pounds. And so that member's office calls the other member's office and, asks if the doctor was there, the veterinarian, and rushes over, takes a look at it. And funny enough, she was hypoglycemic. So gave her some syrup that was back in the kitchen on her gums, and she perked right up. So sometimes the clinical skills can be useful in the house as well.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
kind of funny. See, we know our stuff. We're
Mhm.
we're important in all places.
Yeah.
Oh, poor little thing.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, and then after AVMA,
Mhm.
you picked up a role in industry working for
Yeah.
Purina.
It's always hard to leave a place that you love when you love what you're doing, you love the people that you work with. I spent 4 years kind of outside of the kind of tighter world of strict veterinary medicine, outside of the veterinary hospital is what I mean by that. And now I get to kind of think more inside of veterinary patient care and veterinary medicine within the veterinary hospital. I think one common thread that's appealed to me about the different roles that I've taken, and especially now, and I hear commonly repeated in other industry veterinarians, is that there's a great amount of satisfaction that comes from being able to have one touch point and potentially make it hundreds of touch points and impact so many patient lives through what you're able to communicate, to that veterinarian or to that veterinary student. And it's not necessarily about, yes, you're not going to be the one in the exam room with that patient, and you can't replace that feeling and that impact. But there's certainly a lot of satisfaction, I think, that I get out of knowing that when I am talking about nutrition and educating around optimal nutrition with a veterinarian, then a veterinary hospital, then I know that they're going to educate their clients with the information. I think kind of speaking to that non-linear career trajectory, in being able to look at opportunities that might come your way, even if you're not looking for them, and kind of recognize them, keeping an open mind, and knowing that maybe there is something else, that this path might be leading you towards, that you didn't really have in mind before, you hadn't envisioned it, but it might actually be a great place to go.
Absolutely. The final four questions before we wrap up for today. And
Mhm.
the first question is, what is something on your bucket list?
I want to go on and I have a lot of things on my bucket list. I also love to travel, but I want to cruise.
Cruise.
Want to
Nice.
well, I think they're called cruises, but they're really kind of adventure tours. They're where you basically go down to Antarctica on a boat
Oh.
and do all the fun stuff with the ice, essentially.
Fun stuff with the ice.
Fun stuff with the ice. Hiking Kilimanjaro is another bucket list item. Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. Yeah, that one
Yeah.
would be neat. All right. Second question is, what is a moment of simple joy for you?
Having my morning coffee.
I have gotten
I
a
think
lot of answers that are coffee and tea.
mhm. Yeah.
The third one, I'm always interested to hear what people say on
Mhm.
this one. If you could create a law that everyone had to follow, what would your law be?
Okay. I've really struggled with this one. Really, really struggled with this one, which is probably a little ironic. We make a law that says if you're going to have one blocked off street sign for road construction in front of somebody's house, that you just have one that encompasses all of the small times that the street is blocked off in different days, so that there's not three different confusing signs. There's just one.
Avoid redundancy in your road
Avoid
signs.
avoid
I like
redundancy
it.
in your emergency no parking signs.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, and finally, what is something you're most grateful for?
I this is gonna sound really, really cheesy, but I am grateful for every day that I get to wake up and I get to do what I love. And I think that is also, something out of choice, and that when I wake up, I really enjoy what I do. And I I enjoy the effect that that has on the rest of my life as well. And I enjoy my life a lot outside of work. And certainly don't think that work is the end all be all of everything, but I do really enjoy just that I get to wake up every day and I get to be alive.
This has been the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. Whether you are listening or watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please make sure you are subscribed to catch all these amazing people in our profession. Also, send this episode to someone you think who would appreciate it. Have a recommendation for someone who would be a good guest? Please reach out on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. There aren't that many Dr. Sprinkles. Until next time, Vet Lifers.